celebrating our 20th season. From the college by the lake, meeting the personalities and discussing the issues that affect all of Coeur d'Alene and the inland Northwest. We are the North Idaho College Public Forum. And now, here's your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
In recent programs, we've been doing what I would describe as travelogues, and today we'd like to take you on a trip to Spain. And from our past programs, we are very pleased to do this kind of subject because you react in a very positive way. Many of you are very interested in what to see when you go to other parts of the world. We're very fortunate to have as our guest today Glenn Walker, who's been on this program a number of times before, particularly when he served for many years as the Kootenai County prosecutor. He's now in private practice and very successful practice in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Glenn has been on this program dealing with a lot of issues that deal with the criminal justice system. And although, as I announced, we're going to talk about Spain in the early part of the program, we're going to take advantage of our guests, and near the end of the program, we may discuss some of the very famous cases that have been tried in the United States recently and take advantage of his expertise in that area. Glenn, welcome to the program.
Glad to be here.
And as always, I'm pleased to have regular panelist Steve Schink, who is Dean of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and I shall ask Steve to commence the questioning.
Thank you, Tony. Glenn, maybe you could take a minute and just sort of set this thing in some sort of perspective for us. Was it a vacation? Was it a business trip? What areas of Spain did you cover? How long you were there? That sort of thing.
Well, Steve, I was very, very fortunate to find a wonderful woman to get married to.
Oh, honeymoon.
And yes, took a honeymoon to Spain. Just so happened that a friend had a condominium, made that available to us. So we went over there. Went to the south of Spain, on the Costa del Sol, the sun coast of Spain. In fact, pretty close to Gibraltar on the Mediterranean. So we went over, took about a day to get there and a day to get back, and we were there for 10 days. In the south of Spain, we rented a car and drove up to Seville and over to Cordoba. We took some coach tours to some of the old cities, and just found it an absolutely fascinating experience.
What other than the marriage, of course, and congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Was the availability of the condominium what keyed the decision, or was Spain a place that you and your bride had special interest in?
Well, the condo was kind of a last-minute thing. Well, you know, here it is, it's available, and why not? But the main thing was it was a fascination that I've had with Spain for probably 25 years in that nature. I've never had the opportunity to go there. I've been to Europe, to Germany and Russia and England, but I've not been to the south of Europe. And Spain was the country that I most wanted to go to. And my bride wanted to go to Hawaii, and we agreed that we would go to Spain, and we both feel very good about it. It was a wonderful place to be.
How would you compare that trip to some of your other European, and I know that so many things are different, each country's unique and beautiful in its own way, but and it's a little unfair, I suppose, to ask you to, you're obliged, I would imagine, to say that your honeymoon was obviously the best trip you've ever taken. But
well, it was certainly the best travel companion I've ever had.
Excellent answer.
Okay, and it was a wonderful country. We found the people of Spain to be so warm, so friendly, so genuine. That was the thing that stood out most for Betsy and myself. We enjoyed it most because of that. Second, because of the culture. Third, because of the scenery, and of course the antiquities and the culture, things like that.
Glenn, I always think of in doing this type of program, viewers that are going to go to Spain in the future, or France, whatever country we're doing, and for those who are listening and have already had an excitement from what you have said, what would you recommend when they visit Spain? What parts of Spain should they visit? Are there particular sites or historical places they should visit?
Well, you know, this is the month, we're now April the 8th as we tape this, and this is the month that Expo 92 starts in Seville, Spain. So I would encourage anybody who has the opportunity to go to Spain in 1992 to do it. If you're thinking about going to Europe and you have the opportunity to go to Spain, please don't miss it, would be my advice. And certainly you want to go to the south of Spain and go to Seville, and you want to go to Cordoba. The Alhambra is in Cordoba. In a stretch of 4 4, 5, 6 hours, you could drive to Ronda, to Seville, to Cordoba, and back. You wouldn't want to because there's so much to see, but there's so much in a fairly concentrated area. The Sierra Nevada mountains are absolutely beautiful. They go up 10,500 feet high, and ancient cities. Romans, Carthaginians, Greeks, Phoenicians, just one wave of people after another have been in these areas. And you're in Ronda, for example, which is on top of a big hill, as so many of the cities are, for protection, and it's famous for the gorge. And there are 3 bridges. There's a Roman bridge, then there's the Arab bridge, and then there's the new bridge, which is 300 and some years old. There's just so much there. And walking through these narrow streets where the Moorish conquerors were, and then the story of the Christian slaves as they worked for the Moors, and the architecture, and as the cities and the towns evolved through the year, there's just so much to see in Spain, so much to enjoy. And particularly Seville. It is one of the beautiful cities in the world, and it would be hard to find a better place for Expo 92 than Seville. The contrast of the ancient and the new. In fact, 2 of the Roman emperors were born in Seville, Spain.
It's really fascinating. And nothing always that dictates how long you stay and what you can do is the economic conditions. What is the exchange rate and all? Is it more expensive to go to Spain than some other countries in Europe, or less expensive?
Well, I certainly think Spain is going to be more expensive this year than it ever has in the past. There's no doubt about that because of Expo and, of course, the Summer Olympics in Barcelona. Now, I didn't get up to Barcelona. Barcelona had to be about 500 miles north on the Mediterranean coast than where I was. If I had another city that I would want to go to in Spain, it would be Barcelona. I found the entire country, all of it that I saw, absolutely fascinating. In Seville, we paid probably 20-25% less in February than you would pay right now. I mean, in fact, they gave us a 20% discount off their rate, but their rate had been inflated for Expo.
Steve Sheen.
I like Tony, I sort of lean toward practical questions if I'm planning a trip. Do you or your wife speak Spanish?
No, we don't, but I took Spanish in the 9th and 10th grade in high school, and she had studied French quite a bit, and between the 2 of us we worked together, and we got enough, especially Betsy, got enough so that we could take care of things like ordering in restaurants and buying gas and stuff like that. So we worked on it, and we found that whenever we did, and Betsy was so good at this, working so hard on it, they just bend over backwards trying to help you if you just show them a little bit of concern. A very genuine, warm people.
What about time of year? You were there recently?
We were there in the middle to late February, and the weather had been wonderful until the very day we got there, and it turned cold and stormy on the Mediterranean coast, and it got warm again, sunny again 2 days before we left.
Is there a preferred time? Is summer the season? Fall, spring?
Summer is very hot, and if you have the opportunity to go in the fall or late spring, that would be the ideal.
And what about travel arrangements? How did you make connections, and was it?
It's easy to do. Spain is the most traveled country in Europe. It's the destination place for Northern Europeans, and there's more tourists there than anywhere else in Europe. So it's very easy.
Your air connections were to Seattle, and then
we flew from Spokane to Chicago, and it was a Chicago flight that stopped and changed planes in Washington, D.C. We had earlier made arrangements to fly out of Seattle through Dallas and to Madrid. Madrid is the only city that you come into from the United States. There's no direct flights, or there weren't, and I don't think there will be, into Barcelona for the Olympics.
Approximate travel time is?
Well, there's from here to Madrid is a 9-hour time differential, and basically we figured on 1 day including that, so about 13 hours from Spokane.
Glenn, you and I have talked many times before about Europe and what's happening. You have a real fascination with public policy, and you have been to the Soviet Union, among other places. And of course, I couldn't end this program without asking you, what are the Spanish people saying about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the liberation of Eastern Europe? I'm sure that's on the minds of people all over Europe. And what kind of reaction did you get to those remarkable developments in the last couple of years.
Well, Tony, I wish I could tell you that I had the opportunity, as I have on prior trips, to sit and have long, wonderful discussions with the people about current events, but I didn't have that much opportunity for those kinds of discussions as I have and you've had in the past on your trips. But in general, I can say bits and pieces that I picked up is that they're very in tune, they're very aware, they're very European. They're very in tune with all of the changes throughout Europe. And very much want to be integrated into Europe. Spain's basically a fairly poor country that's coming of age. But the area where we were in the south of Spain, near Malaga, right on the Mediterranean coast, has a tremendous amount of British people who stay there, a lot of expatriates from around the world. We met Lebanese and Germans, British, Canadians, Americans, tourists of all kind, and many stay there year-round.
And with the negotiations been going in the Middle East, at this particular time, is it a little less tension-oriented travel? And there have been some times when, particularly for Americans, it's rather dangerous to travel with the terrorists.
If we had been there a year earlier, well, I'm sure we would not have gone a year earlier. That was because of the war in the Middle East. We would not have done it at that time, and I'm sure that that close to North Africa, that close to the Arab world, we wouldn't have done it. By the way, one of the trips that most people take when they go to the south of Spain is across to Tangier in Morocco. We did not take that one because we became so fascinated with the Spanish culture after we got there, even though I was fascinated with it before, that we just wanted to spend more of our time in Spain itself. So we didn't go across to Morocco. It was just, I guess, about an hour and a half or so boat ride from near the Gibraltar area.
I have visited with other individuals who have been to Spain before, and the feedback I get is that from a geographical perspective that it's such a beautiful country. Would you agree with that conclusion?
It's fascinating and beautiful. There are more mountains in Spain. It's more mountainous than any European country other than Switzerland. So certainly of all those that we normally think of traveling to, it's far more mountainous. The mountains are huge, they're beautiful. My wife said that the coast that we were in near, that it looked very much like many parts of Southern California. I didn't make that immediate connection, but I think that that's probably true. The beauty in the white villages, the Arab influence in the architecture, the towns and villages sitting right smack up on top of a big hill, and you're driving along through rolling plains like we have in the Palouse country, except the hill's much larger, and usually a little bit more treed. And then up in the distance you see a city, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one, and they're just perfectly white. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, fascinating country.
Steve Sheen.
Glenn, you've mentioned a lot of the things that you liked. Are there any pitfalls you could help other visitors avoid? Did anything not go well for you on the trip?
Everything went fine for us. We found our accommodations to be good, but on a little bit scaled down version. Everything is a little bit smaller. The streets are smaller, the cars are smaller, the accommodations were clean, but they weren't like staying at the Hilton or anything like that.
You mentioned earlier that you rented a car. That was no problem. They drive on the right side of the road.
They drive on the right side of the road. We saw and got to visit with many Brits, and they were reluctant to rent cars because the Spanish people drive on the wrong side of the road for them. But for us, it wasn't any problem. Getting gasoline wasn't a problem, and directions were a problem because we learned enough Spanish to take care of meals and things like that. But we had some trouble in cities figuring out where we were and how to get around. But one of the things that we were so impressed with, there was two occasions, one outside, well actually both in the Seville region, where we were trying to look for Roman ruins outside Seville, and we were on a wrong road. We were in the same part of the outside the city, but not anywhere near the right road. And we stopped at a gas station, and there was not a person there that spoke English, which is the exception, by the way. Most everywhere you go, you will find somebody who speaks enough English so you can get by. But there was enough people came around, they figured out that we were looking for this city, I don't remember the name of it, where essentially it was Roman ruins. And one of the guys got in the car with his family He couldn't say anything to us that we could understand, nor us to him, but he understood that. And he drove for about 10 minutes, going different roads until we got to the place, and then he just pulled off the side and waved his own. And then the other time was actually in the edge of Seville, in the middle of the industrial complex almost, and we were trying to find the road to Cordoba. And we stopped at another gas station. The same thing happened. The guy got in the car with his friend and drove us around to get us on the highway to Cordoba. A very gracious people.
You mentioned food a couple of times, and that's always a highlight of my travel. Maybe that's not the way it should be, but it is. Did you enjoy the food there? Is there anything particularly interesting?
Well, we loved it. We went to different kinds of restaurants, not just Spanish restaurants. And we liked it, and we tried as much variety as we could.
Reasonably priced?
We found it was reasonably priced, very competitive to American restaurants.
I'm going to do what I invite Steve to do. This has been real fascinating, and you're so articulate, Glenn, and you have that ability to make one look at where you've been with the visual aids, even just from your language. But there's been some things happening in this country that are certainly in your field that has been of major attention in the last couple of years, and one of them was the Kennedy Smith trial in Florida, and then more recently the Tyson trial. And we were just chatting before the program with Steve here about the role of the prosecution and the defense and what the balance is. May I just kick this off, and I know Steve will get into this too. Oftentimes there is the impression that somehow the defense has the very same ability that the prosecution does in personnel and staff to carry on these very long, detailed, and expensive trials. Would you explain to our viewers that in many cases prosecution has the advantage? I'm not speaking of those particular two trials.
Right.
But,
well, yeah, the question that Steve brought up earlier and you brought up now, I think the perception was that the scales were tipped in favor of the defendant in each of these two famous trials that you mentioned. And I don't think that that's accurate, although I understand the conception. I think the reality is that the scales were fairly evened out there. The prosecution, and I was a prosecutor for 10 years and I had some big cases against some very talented defense attorneys, but never did I feel that they had an advantage. I always felt that we had an advantage, and we did, and the prosecutors still do, because the prosecutor has himself and all of his legal staff and staff of investigators, or at least one usually, even in a fairly small office like in Kootenai County. And of course, all of the sheriff's officers and police officers at his disposal. And he has the discretion to use them as he needs. In his cases, he has statutory authority to do that. And that exists in every state. So in the Kennedy Smith case and in the Tyson case, the people that I've talked to, the general feeling is that the verdicts are probably accurate, fair verdicts in both cases. And certainly we have to accept that anyway. But what happened there was you had multi-rich people or mega-rich people. They were able to even up the score and have a staff of lawyers themselves. Most people charged with a crime do not have the ability to do that. It's tough enough to have someone to represent them, let alone an investigator. For example, the Kootenai County Public Defender does not have an investigator. So they're up against prosecutors and who have an investigator of their own, a staff of lawyers that they can work on cases, and all the police and sheriffs at their disposal. The public defender doesn't even have a single investigator for a single case.
or if the defendant has the financial resources to hire what one might call an outstanding defense attorney like yourself, but they might not have enough money to hire this additional assistance you need, such investigators. So even a very good attorney may be, I think I hear you saying, at a disadvantage, but not having the support system in preparing for the case.
No matter how good the defense attorney, if you do not have the resources, financial resources available to you to give you the support, you're going to be hamstrung. And you may be able to wing it in the courtroom because of years and years of experience. But if you don't have the time and the ability and the resources to investigate the case, you have a tremendous disadvantage. And the prosecutor has that advantage in all cases all over the country.
One other question before we go back to Steve in this area. I had a friend that practiced law until he was 87 in North Carolina. He was a brilliant attorney, and he was an artist in the courtroom. And he always indicated to me that the selection of the jury was the most critical moment in the trial, making sure that you had a jury that you felt comfortable with, that they would be able to comprehend all the plans as you had laid those out. Number one, would you agree with that conclusion? And number two, if that selection process is very, very critical, does this extra staff and all have anything to do with that part of the process? Or is that the one time when the two attorneys may be most even, they're simply going before a potential juror and asking questions?
Well, Tony, they're certainly even at that point, and there's no advantage to the prosecutor at that point. There might be an advantage to the prosecutor in a small town if the prosecutor knows everybody, but other than that, no. And do I agree on the point of it's certainly a critical part of the process, but it isn't, frankly, as critical as it used to be, and that is because of a streamlining of the court process. We don't in Kootenai County, Idaho, anywhere in Idaho that I know of anymore, we don't individually select the we don't individually examine the potential jurors. We take, if it's a felony case, we take typically 27 to 32 people as a group, question them all as once, all as one, and we have to get them to relate to us like we're talking one-on-one. Now, when I started prosecuting cases, and even sometimes as a defense attorney, when I've had the opportunity for individual questioning of the juries, yes, I agree with you completely. And the friend or uncle or whoever it was that you were talking about that practiced till he was 87, he probably would be unable to function today if he had to do it, not because he wouldn't have the ability. He just, after all those years of doing it the other way, he would say, what does this world come to if you can't even question the jurors one by one, one-on-one? And when you could do that, you could get to know them, and then you can use your gut instincts, your feel for people, what's life all about, how do they relate to it, and you could say, yeah, I want that person on the jury. But you can't do that now because you're talking to a group of people, and many times you can't even get them to say anything.
But as you're dealing with the group as a whole, though, if you do sense a problem in some way, you do have the right to excuse a certain number of potential jurors.
In felony cases, you can excuse 7, unless it's a capital case, then 10. And in misdemeanor cases, you can excuse 4 for any reason you want.
But you have to do that more at a distance than you used to.
You do it at more of a distance, yeah.
Steve Sheen.
Glenn, we've had a lot of high-profile legal proceedings and quasi-legal proceedings, and I'm thinking of the Tyson case and the Kennedy Smith case and the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings. Is that good or bad for justice in the case of Tyson and Kennedy Smith, and for the judicial system as a whole in all 3 instances?
Well, it's certainly the American way as we're evolving, that we have high-profile anything. I don't know that it's all that good. I don't see how the justice system has been benefited by it. But on the other hand, there is something to say for it in the sense that you take the Kennedy Smith or the Tyson case or even the Clarence Thomas matter, there's an awful lot of education, probably more than most people want, about these areas. So that's got to have some value to it.
In the case of those 2 trials, is there an advantage to defense or to prosecution when there is so much attention from your perspective as an attorney in either position relating to the judge in the case? With all that attention, are they likely to lean toward the defendant or lean toward the accused?
Well, all I can say is from what I observed about those 2 cases you mentioned, there did not appear to be any leaning by the judge toward any side. I mean, they appeared to be very, very competent judges who weren't swayed in any fashion by the things that went on with the press and the public.
Also, on your visits before to the Soviet Union and other places, we can compare the judicial system of this country and in Europe and so forth. How would you rank our criminal justice system compared with even other democracies?
Well, I certainly like a lot of what I see about the British system, because you see prosecutors and defense attorneys, these barristers, as they call them because they're trial lawyers, they play different roles. One time they may be a prosecutor and another time a defense attorney. I think there's an awful lot of value in that, because I was a prosecutor for 10 years, and as much as I tried to be fair, always tried to be fair, I know that you can get kind of a tunnel syndrome, kind of like blinders on, and you don't see defendants as real people. You see them as sleazebags or something like that, some name you might put to them, but you don't really see them as people. And the reality is they are citizens too, and they're not guilty just because they're charged with a crime. Certainly, other than that, I would take the American system over anything else. The British system, your cause is to find the truth, and I like that. But certainly, there's nothing better than a democracy, and I like our system better. I think it's certainly heavily weighted on the side of prosecution, and it always will be.
There's another controversial question. In fact, we had the privilege this last year to interview the entire Supreme Court of Idaho for their 100th birthday on this program, and we asked that question of them concerning the rules and procedures of coverage of trials. Glenn, what is your opinion about television coverage of a major criminal trial? And again, that happened in the case of the Kennedy Smith trial. Do you think that affects the jury in any way, or any other personnel that's involved in the case? Do you think that is really a good or a bad idea to have live coverage?
Well, I certainly, first of all, I don't think Idaho is going to change right away, and I don't see how in the William Kennedy Smith trial it had any effect on the jury at all. I watched part of it live, I watched part of it on tapes. I tried to pay attention to the jury to see if the jury seemed to be distracted. They did not seem to be, and it will be probably studies of that as time goes by that may make it a kind of a barometer for future states. I don't know what those jurors have to say individually about it, but I'm sure that there are going to be books written about it, and I don't see the fears that we've had in the past that it will be actors on stage and people more concerned with the camera than the truth. I don't see that that's going to make any difference, and I relate that to my own experience as a prosecutor and defense attorney. I've tried cases that were in Coeur d'Alene and in Boise and in other areas, sometimes where it was a lead story on the newspapers and television for 2 weeks at a time. It never had one effect on me. I really don't think it ever had an effect on any judge I was in front of. The newspaper people were there, the reporters were there, they were drawing their sketches. I mean, it might be something you know when you walk in the courtroom, and you never have a chance to think of it until that evening, if you think of it at all.
That's what I was thinking. And one of the jurors in the Kennedy Smith trial said you become so absorbed in the activities that day, and it's such a serious matter that your mind just doesn't have time to draw attention to who may be there.
The fear of the distractions from the camera, I think, are unrealistic.
Steve Sheen.
Glenn, we don't have a lot of time left, but in all the cases we've been discussing, there seems to be an absence of real hard physical evidence and two credible or fairly credible people with opposing stories. Is that common in your experience as an attorney?
Well, as a lawyer, as a trial lawyer, I work witnesses very, very hard, and I feel like that's the whole case, is what is the strength of your witness. And to have such incredibly capable witnesses, as in the Kennedy Smith case, on both sides, is a rarity. It appeared that in the Tyson case, it appeared from just watching from way outside that there was a great difference in the credibility of the witnesses. I mean, she seemed to be a whole lot more credible than he seemed. That didn't seem to be the case. Seemed to be much more equal in the Kennedy Smith case.
On that note, I have to bring a permanent conclusion. Glenn, you're very busy, and I appreciate so much your taking time to be with us. And on both these subjects, been very fascinating. And Steve, thank you for your very fine questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you've enjoyed our program, and I invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we will discuss another important issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.